Three servants, a master, a pile of money so large it would take an ordinary laborer 20 years to earn a single portion of it. You have heard this story your entire life. You have heard it preached as a lesson about spiritual gifts, about faithfulness, about using what God gave you before He comes back. And all of that is true. But here is what nobody told you. Read it again, slowly this time, and you will find something that has nothing to do with a spiritual metaphor and everything to do with how money actually works. Because when you read the parable of the talents the way a first-century Jewish merchant would have read it, a man who understood interest rates, trade routes, and the weight of a talent of silver, the story transforms. It stops being a Sunday school lesson. It becomes an investment manual. And the most important line in the whole parable? It is not the one your pastor quoted. Stay with us, because we are going to reach it. And when we do, it is going to reframe everything you thought you knew about risk, return, and what God actually expects you to do with what He has placed in your hands. Before we can understand what Jesus was teaching, we need to understand what a talent actually was. Because if you picture a small gold coin, you have already lost the plot. A talent was not a coin. It was a unit of weight, roughly 75 pounds of silver, depending on the regional standard. In first-century Judea, 1 talent of silver represented approximately 6,000 denarii. A denarius was a standard day's wage for a common laborer. Do the arithmetic. 1 talent was roughly 20 years of a working man's income. So, when the master in Matthew 25 distributes 5 talents to the first servant, 2 to the second, and 1 to the third, he is not handing out pocket change. He is entrusting the equivalent of 100 years of wages, 40 years of wages, and 20 years of wages, respectively. This is institutional capital. This is the kind of sum that changes generational trajectories. And here is the first thing the parable teaches us about investing before a single servant has done a single thing. The master distributes capital according to ability. The text says it plainly, each according to his own ability. He does not give everyone the same amount. He does not apologize for the disparity. He makes a considered judgment about capacity, and he allocates accordingly. That is asset allocation. That is a principle deciding how much risk exposure each manager can handle before handing over the portfolio. We are 3 verses in, and we already have a principle that most financial advisors charge you to learn. Now, what did the servants do with it? That is where it gets interesting, and a little uncomfortable. The text tells us that the servant who received 5 talents went at once and traded with them. The Greek word there, ergazomai, means to work, to labor, to be active in commerce. He did not wait for a better moment. He did not study the market for another season. He deployed the capital immediately. And the result? He doubled it. 5 talents became 10. The servant with 2 talents did the same thing. 2 became 4. Now, the text does not tell us exactly how they did it, and that is intentional. Jesus was not prescribing a specific instrument. He was describing a posture, an orientation toward capital. These servants understood that money held in stasis is money in decline. They understood what we would now call the opportunity cost of inaction. But here is the detail that most readers skip entirely. Both servants doubled their principal, 100% return, and the master's response to both of them is identical, word for word. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Notice what the master does not say. He does not say, well done for achieving 100% return. He does not reward the outcome. He rewards the faithfulness, the willingness to put capital to work at all. This is the compounding principle embedded inside a parable. The master's reward structure is itself a compounding structure. Demonstrate faithful stewardship of a smaller allocation, and you receive authority over a larger one. Your track record becomes your next allocation. Warren Buffett has said that his most important investment decision was choosing the right teachers early. The servants who doubled their talents had already made that decision. They understood that deployment is the first act of stewardship. If this is landing differently than you expected, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what comes next in this parable is the part that most Bible teachers never reach, and it is the most financially precise passage in the entire New Testament. Here is where the parable stops being comfortable. The third servant, the one who received 1 talent, the equivalent of 20 years of wages, took his allocation, dug a hole in the ground, and buried it. And he had a reason. He explains it to the master when the accounting comes. I was afraid. Let that sit for a moment. He was not lazy in the conventional sense. He did not spend the money. He did not lose it in a bad trade. He preserved the principle. In his own mind, he was being responsible, conservative, safe. But the master's response is the most economically precise statement in the entire parable. He says, "You ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest." Bankers, interest, a minimum expected return. The master is not asking for a miracle. He is not asking for 100% return. He is saying, even the most conservative available instrument, depositing the money with money changers who paid a known rate of return, would have been better than burial. In the 1st century, Jewish law had nuanced provisions around lending at interest, but depositing funds with a banker and receiving interest was a recognized and accepted practice. The master knew exactly what the baseline return should have been, and the servant had failed to meet even that floor. This is the biblical case against the savings account that earns 0.01% while inflation runs at 4%. This is the parable warning against the CD that loses purchasing power in real terms. The third servant did not lose money in nominal terms. He lost it in real terms, and the master held him accountable for the gap. Here is the question I want you to sit with. How much of your own capital is currently buried? Not literally, but parked in instruments that feel safe because the number does not go down, while the purchasing power quietly erodes year after year. Comment below. Type the number 1 if you have money sitting somewhere right now earning less than inflation. Type 2 if you have already moved it. I want to know where we are, because this matters. Let us go back to the allocation decision, because there is something embedded in it that modern portfolio theory has spent decades trying to formalize. The master gave each servant capital according to his own ability. This was not random. This was not favoritism. This was a calibrated risk assessment based on observed capacity. The servant who received 5 talents was, by implication, the most capable of deploying large capital effectively. The servant who received 1 talent was, by implication, the least experienced, or perhaps the most risk-averse by temperament. And the master knew this before he left. Here is the financial principle. Appropriate risk tolerance is not one-size-fits-all, and a wise allocator does not pretend otherwise. A 25-year-old with 40 years of compounding runway has a different appropriate risk profile than a 60-year-old who needs capital preservation. A person with a stable income stream and low fixed costs can absorb volatility that would be genuinely dangerous for someone with dependence and variable income. The master in this parable understood this. He did not give the 1-talent servant 5 talents and then condemn him for being overwhelmed. He gave him what his capacity could handle, and then held him accountable for doing something with it. The failure of the 3rd servant was not that he received 1 talent instead of 5. His failure was that he allowed his fear of loss to override his responsibility to deploy. He confused the absence of loss with the presence of stewardship. There is a version of Christian financial thinking that treats all risk as spiritually dangerous, that equates caution with faithfulness. And I want to be honest with you. This parable does not support that reading. The master in this story is not impressed by caution. He is impressed by deployment. Now, before you hear that as a license to take reckless risks, stay with us, because the next section shows us exactly what responsible deployment actually looked like. And it is more nuanced than just invest in something. The 2 servants who doubled their allocations are described with the same Greek word for their activity, ergozomai, active commerce. But the parable does not specify the same strategy for both. This is deliberate. The servant with 5 talents had more capital to diversify across multiple instruments, trade partnerships, agricultural investment, lending arrangements. The servant with 2 talents operated at a different scale, but with the same posture of active deployment. What we can observe from the text and from the economic context of 1st century Judea is that the available instruments formed a spectrum, from the lowest risk deposit with a money changer, what the master references as the floor, to mid-risk trade partnerships, to higher risk direct commercial ventures. The master's rebuke to the 3rd servant names only the lowest risk option, the banker's deposit, as the minimum acceptable action. He does not demand that the servant had taken the highest risk path. He demands only that the servant had done something. This maps onto what we might call a tiered deployment framework. The first tier is liquidity and safety, the equivalent of the money changer deposit. This is your emergency fund, your short-term treasury instruments, the capital you cannot afford to lose. The parable does not condemn holding some capital here. It condemns holding all capital here when you have capacity for more. The second tier is productive deployment, trade partnerships, income-producing assets, equity ownership. This is where the first 2 servants operated. Capital put to work in enterprises that generate returns above the baseline. The third tier is growth and compounding, the higher risk, higher return end of the spectrum. Not recklessness, but deliberate, capacity-appropriate exposure to upside. The wisdom of the parable is not take maximum risk. The wisdom is deploy according to your capacity, and do not let fear collapse your entire allocation into the lowest tier when your capacity can handle more. If this framework is giving you a new lens for your own financial picture, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. What tier is most of your capital sitting in right now? And is that where your actual capacity says it should be? The parable tells us that, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. After a long time. This is not incidental. This is the compounding timeline embedded in the narrative structure. The master did not return the next morning to check on his investment. He gave the capital time to work. He understood that meaningful returns require a meaningful horizon. The first servant did not double 5 talents in a week. In the economic context of the ancient Near East, 100% return on large capital, through trade partnerships, agricultural ventures, and commercial lending, would have taken years, possibly a full business cycle. This is the biblical case for long-term investing. The master structured the arrangement with a long time horizon because he understood that capital needs time to compound. He did not create anxiety by demanding monthly performance reports. He created space for the process to work. Now, here is the part of this that should make you genuinely uncomfortable if you have been waiting for the right moment to deploy your capital. The third servant also had that long time. He had the same runway that the other two servants had. He had years, possibly a decade or more, to put that one talent to work at even the most conservative rate of return available to him. And he spent all of that time waiting. The opportunity cost of his inaction was not just the interest he failed to earn. It was the compounding that never started. Every year he waited was a year the baseline return was not accumulating. The gap between what he returned and what he could have returned grew larger with every season that passed. This is the parable's most precise financial insight, and it is the one that most of us need to hear most urgently. The cost of waiting is not zero. It is compounding in reverse, and when the accounting came, it always comes, the buried talent was taken from him entirely. Not because the master was cruel, but because the master understood something the servant had refused to accept. Undeployed capital is not preserved capital. It is declining capital. And entrusting it to someone who will not deploy it is not stewardship. It is waste. We have arrived at the line. The one I mentioned in the opening, the one that changes everything. After the third servant is rebuked and his talent redistributed, Jesus says this, "For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." Most people hear this verse and feel vaguely unsettled. It sounds almost unfair. The rich get richer? That is a financial principle Jesus is endorsing? Yes, but not in the way you might fear. The word has in the Greek, echo, in this context, carries the meaning of active possession, not passive holding. The servant who has is the servant who is actively deploying, actively compounding, actively stewarding. The servant who has not is the servant who is holding without deploying, the one whose capital is buried. Jesus is not saying that the wealthy deserve to accumulate more simply because they are wealthy. He is saying that capital in motion generates more capital. That deployment creates the conditions for further deployment. That the track record of faithful stewardship is itself the qualification for greater allocation. This is the compounding principle stated in theological language. And it is not prosperity gospel. It is not a promise that God will supernaturally multiply your bank account because you have enough faith. It is a description of how capital actually behaves when it is deployed faithfully over time. The servant who doubled 5 talents to 10 did not receive 10 more talents as a gift. He received authority over much, expanded stewardship, greater responsibility, a larger allocation to deploy. His reward was more opportunity to compound. And this is where the parable closes the loop on everything we have covered. Risk tolerance, asset allocation, the cost of inaction, the compounding timeline, they all converge here. The master's entire system is a compounding system. Faithful deployment at the appropriate risk level over a sufficient time horizon produces a track record that qualifies you for greater allocation, which, deployed faithfully, produces greater returns, which qualifies you for more. This is not a metaphor dressed up as finance. This is finance dressed up as a parable, and the author knew exactly what he was encoding. So here is your challenge for this week. Identify the one allocation decision you have been deferring out of fear, the one talent you have been sitting on. Write it down. Name the fear specifically, and then identify the lowest risk deployment option available to you, the money changer's deposit, if that is where you have to start. Comment the word flow below right now if you are committing to that this week.
I read every single comment, and I will be praying specifically for your financial breakthrough.
And if this teaching has opened the parable in a way you have never seen before, hit that subscribe button. New biblical finance teaching every single week, and what we are building here is just getting started. The third servant did not fail because he lacked talent. He failed because he let fear make his allocation decision for him. And now you know exactly what that costs, in Scripture and in compound interest. Thanks for watching. The end screen has more videos in the same world. Pick one and keep going. Thanks for being here. Pick whichever video on the end screen calls to you